fiction is more. Oh, Winnie Mandela.
Yes, I had. So there's Winnie Mandela's book that written by Songe Msema. A bit different from how Anne puts it. Recently, the six saga Melina Ferguson. Melina Ferguson is writing the story about AKA and
Really?
Anneli. About how love kills, something like that, right? And then someone writes. Okay, I said it before. I don't like Melinda always hopping on people's tragic, what do you call these things? Misfortunes, like it was imbi. And then when you want to write stories, you want to make money, but also putting yourself out there. Wait for the story to finish, and then you write maybe in hindsight. Now the thing is still hot, aka we don't know who killed him. Anneli is still a mystery. So give family time. Even people like Nabo, I do think that they capitalize on black stories. They want to tell black stories without the context or the voice from the black person himself.
Yeah.
So I'm like, this thing is not nice. So Winnie's book written by Sisonke and the 491 days, it's beautiful, it's good. And you say when you read, I read 491 days, I read Sisonke Msimang's book, Resurrection of Winnie. You could tell by Winnie had a voice in Sisonke Msimang's voice. The way she's represented. Sometimes she's what do you call this thing? She was a villain. She killed people, just like everyone else killed people during that time. So we are enlarging it because So sometimes I have a problem with that, but I think it's good to give account.
Mara, I don't even think it's the author's issue. It is a South African issue. It is when I'm standing at Woolies and usually being one of the few black people standing in line and understanding the significance of why that's the case, standing in line and looking at the cashiers, ubona umntu.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah.
Wena umntu omnyama ubona umntu. Istori salamntu sinzulu. You can relate to it. Usisi wakho, mamakho, your neighbor, you know? Ngumntu lamntu.
Yes.
Apha phuma khona. Kokwabo xa ephumayo kusasa eyophangela.
Yeah.
Phume umntu endlini. Khona ke factions abantu apha kule country where uyikesha lamntu.
Yeah.
Nothing more. Uyikesha. Who exists in that moment and then stops existing once engasuze emehlweni wakhe, you know. The unfortunate thing is the South Africa kubakho lana ngoba there's this rainbow nation, we are happy, especially in sports events, and andiyithandi laa nto leya, like la pretense, I hate it. So le nto uyithethayo, it's not unique to Anne, it's a South African thing.
Yeah, no.
It's a South African thing.
All the time. Also white people, they are patronizing. Yes. A friend of mine who told me now, she's very close with white people. She's friends with white people. You like flirting with whiteness. And then I'm like, I'm not sure, maybe I also become problematic because each and everything they do, I scrutinize. I'm like, why do you smile at me like that? Why did you say that? This other time, one of them, they came to our house and then chatting, and then like that thing of what do you do? Sharp, and then I don't know what I was looking at the time, but then in 10, and then so I explained this thing. He's like, that's nice. You're like, you smart, kind of thing.
Hey.
And I'm like, sure, right? And then also that where traveling came in. You've traveled out South Africa. I'm like, a number of times. Like how? So the idea is that I can't do it out of my own accord. There should be something that actually has made me to travel. So I was like, comrades, you don't talk to us like that. Stop being patronizing.
You see, that level of patronizing is, to me, a symptom of acknowledging the past of South Africa, that you are shocked Mdomnyama has traveled. You are shocked that Mdomnyama has accessibility to leave this country, has the finances and the means to leave this country. Why? It's very telling, and to examine it, to go into it deep, is very uncomfortable. And I don't like I don't like this thing that happens in South Africa where I have to be the non-angry black man when I tell you about why the things are this way in this country. I must tell you,
yes.
you know,
No, don't be angry.
Let's all move along. Let's forget the past. I'm like, no, guys.
You're being too. My friend would like saying that. Yolo, don't take it too far. I'm like, I can go very far.
What about upbringing yako shaped Lomdungwe and the way you think as a Yolokazi?
One, the village itself. One, I know very well that it's not just a cliche. It takes a village to raise a kid. Literally, for me, it took the village. In terms of learning and unlearning. There are things that in the community that are done as a collective. We as kids, you sit and you're like, this is the right way to go. And there's development where people say, put yourself first, right? There's English words that we use when you're trying to be superhuman beings. Which way, respect me, I'll respect you. In Xhosa, we are told you am right? And they knew very well that it's not necessarily that you have to give respect because someone is giving you respect. They know as a human being, you must take the first step as a person. So with respect, you take the first step, you respect the person, then they respect you back. Secondly, you know very well that you can't eat while someone else is watching. You must offer them. Those things you are taught at home, but not only in a lecture form. You see it happening, right? So I think the village, because as a child, your brain gets molded there. You make meaning in different narratives because you see how life is. But then I went to the township. You learn how to live for yourself. You learn how to swim, paddle, and also sometimes I would say that you pedal the cream to ensure that it's butter and solid enough for you to stand on. I think basically I was pushed to do that from high school because you don't have much options in townships. You must just push and become the better version of yourself that you want. Then you can leave the township if you want. So I think that's what shaped me. And I think my parents, man, they showed me so much love. Not parents as in mother and father. Parents, the entire family, my grandparents, my father, my mother, everyone else, showing that we do care about you. We see you, you belong, and giving you a platform to have your own voice in the community. It then makes you a better person. You're not found shouting outside because you want to be heard. Because in your home, you've been heard, and you know that even if you don't make sense, you'll be guided into senses.
And what are the guides, or how are you guided? Yeah.
So I have strong values that actually I think they guide me, to use your term. The strong values of one, respect, integrity, putting the other person first. I know we are told that put yourself first. I can't do it for me. No, you put the other person. You be considerate as a person. Those things, they ground me. They always, when I go to sleep, I remember that I am because there are other people. And I don't believe that everything that I do everything is on my hands, like my future is in my hands. It's not necessarily that. It's people who give me networks, who actually expand my network. It's people who give me opportunities, people who listen to me when I speak. It's people who actually are able to come to me and say, I think you're going astray. How about you fix it on A, B, C, and D? So I am because there's other people who are surrounding me. That guides me.
Wow.
Yeah.
I like that. You mentioned you have traveled. What was your first trip abroad?
Well, quick story time. So, not necessarily abroad. So, when I was at the university, I think I was doing second year, I saw a program, a Model United Nations program in Ghana. And you know what I did? I wrote the Vice Chancellor. I told him, I have applied for this program. They've accepted me, but I can't afford flights. At home, they don't have money for flights, no accommodation or anything. The Vice Chancellor, through the manager, responded and called me to a meeting. And then the rest was history. The university paid for my first flight out of the country. First flight ever as well. And then since then I went, I traveled across Africa. I went to Ghana, went to Kenya, Uganda, and then went to Europe, went to America. I have never paid for a single flight because I had always put myself out there for opportunities and for people to see that I am serious about my work. And then if needs be, they pay for me to go and attend and speak at their events.
And how has those travels shaped your view of South Africa and the world's view of South Africa?
Well, I got to be more proud South African. Because when you go to the various countries, you see, firstly, I started to appreciate the constitutional democracy that we have, the many options that we have with our democracy, and also with the expansiveness of the constitution. If you do not like A, B, C, and D, you can hold the government to account through Chapter 9 institutions. But secondly, South Africa, people with the history that we have, very happy people. Ordinarily or naturally footed people would not necessarily be as happy and embrace each other with the history that we have. So when you go to the other countries and you stand there and you're like, I'm from South Africa, one, they embrace you, but also when they speak, they ask about where are you now? You are able to reference your past, but also position yourself in the present and maybe suggest different ways for the future without flinching. So that is a beautiful thing that I have discovered when I travel to the other countries, but particularly with the young people I remember last year when we were in the US, there were some young people from Philippines, Venezuela, Vietnam, and we were talking about politics. They wanted to be part of party politics. And they were like, the environment is so toxic and so volatile that as a young person, dare you join politics, you are written off. You will not participate in anything. Because if you lose, opposition parties are not as friendly as in South Africa. One guy is a medical doctor, and he's like, I'm letting go of my practice, but I want to make fundamental changes in policy and in government. So I'm going to leave my profession and I'll go and join politics. And he's like, if I was in South Africa, I would have made it even in the parties because people are going to embrace me because I'm educated, I'm a professional, then they'll embrace me and I'll join the political organization and later maybe be in government and shape policies as I would like them to be because I'm a capable young person. In South Africa, we're quite open to that. We've seen young people transiting to position of power, and they're getting enough support. And of course, there's room to do more, but we have young people who are in greater heights, and we support them.
It's interesting that you have praise for our constitution. I also have praise for our constitution, but along with the praise, there is an air of caution that I have with it, because it is a constitution that comes from a negotiated settlement. You know, there were concessions made on both sides, but I think the negotiations from the black contingent side was very, I think they were outmaneuvered in certain ways, because before 94, before the end of apartheid, before the new South Africa, we had a parliament that could do so much as opposed to the parliament that we have now, you know. It's a parliament that introduced the 1913 Native Land Act. It's the parliament that introduced the Group Areas Act. And yet the constitution that we have now is set up in such a way where those previous decisions can never be undone, or at least it would be close to impossible to undo those previous decisions. Because of that, because the significance of those decisions in 1913, in 1936, and in 1950, I have issue with the constitution, because it is a constitution that does away with the past and says, okay, it's set in stone. It overlooks so many injustices that most of the country went through, you know, and in the way we were talking about how it's very hard for certain factions of the country to see the humanity in Umdofana Nam now.
Sure.
You know, if a suit, if you're not in the same office space, there is sort of a, demarcation line to abantu ababonakalayo nabantu abangabonwayo, you know. And that's the issue that I have with our constitution. I think it was too ambitious.
Okay.
It was too ambitious at a time when we really needed some radical changes to go forward. And 30 years on, we can clearly say very little has changed. You know, like few people are aware that South Africa was still paying apartheid loans up until the early 2000s. You know, people are not aware of those things when they talk about why haven't things changed. Things haven't changed because we exist in a world that's different to the world where the things that that set the tone for how the story of Black South Africans would go post 94 cannot be revisited, you know, and because it cannot be revisited, we kind of have this narrative where the history of South Africa starts in 94 when it doesn't. You know, the history of South Africa doesn't start with Nelson Mandela becoming president. The history of South Africa is very long, you know, and not being able to go back and look at why it is more likely that a black person is going to be so destitute in their own country is, for me, very disingenuous.
Right, and you attribute that to your constitution. Well, I remember Prof. Ramose, the legal scholar, they call him the constitutional abolitionist. I think now the other professor was in the Human Rights Commission now. Prof. Mudiri as well, there are people who call the constitution like, no, it's not serving black people. But equally, there are people like Dr. Sibanda, who they say the constitution is the best thing that has ever happened, right? And I also believe that the constitution is one of the best constitutions the world has seen.
Definitely.
Right? And the constitution itself, as a living document, you can always amend it to suit our needs at a particular time. But also the constitution, the one thing that I find as fault is the fact that it's silent about the injustice of the past. So if you are silent about the issues that you have, chances of solving those issues are very slim because you must name your problem before you actually attend to the problem itself. So with the constitution preamble, South Africa belongs to everyone who lives, this land belongs to everyone who lives in it. It actually now nullifies the fact that there was the 1913 Land Act that disposes so many people in South Africa. Now they don't have a place to call home. Secondly, that the apartheid itself was a legislation that was passed through a constitution. It was never an illegal arrangement or an arbitrary arrangement. It was an arrangement that was constitutional that apartheid has made. So the constitution currently is kind of nullifying these things or acting as if they never existed. However, for ordinary South Africans, I do think that the constitution can be used as a vehicle to change people's lives on the basis that if we properly utilize the constitution and there's an accountable leadership that can be able to deliver what the constitution says. So you look at the Bill of Rights on what everybody can have in this country. You must have access to healthcare, have access to the ABCD. Do we have or built infrastructure to ensure that we deliver these things? No one would be able to take the government to court because they did not get services at a hospital. Because currently we have cases where people they go to hospital, then some they die or some they get amputated or a lot of things happen. Then they take government to court. That should not be a thing because the government itself is the custodian of the constitution to ensure that they deliver services to people. Secondly, when you look at the constitution is quite packed with how governance should be done. When president is not accountable to people, is doing things that people are not agreeing with, there's chapter 9 institutions to hold the people to account. However, these people are not being accountable. They refuse accountability. And now, if you are going to, we always praise that, what do you call this thing, separation of powers. That these different three levers, they ensure that there's accountability, there's also consistency, there's effectiveness in government. The executive, the judiciary, they all work together in the legislature. They all work together. But however, now, because of the type of politicians we have, we see them covering for each other.
Yeah.
A matter will be taken by the judiciary, referred to Parliament, then Parliament, because of a game of numbers, then they put it to court, right? Or the cabinet will not necessarily act on what the judiciary has recommended. So now there's then gaps in there. However, the Constitution itself will always say, in theory, on paper, it's amazing. However, it needs people to actually put it to test and ensure that they get services.
I like that you name the government as the custodians of the Constitution, because we unfortunately have a government that seems more accountable to themselves than anyone else. Like the 94 to 2008, the government seemed to have a plan. Like you could see there was a plan of succession. Mbeki was behind Mandela. There was an idea of continuation within the party. And then at some point that deviated for some reason, I do not know. But what seems to be in place now is who owns the most skeletons or who owns the most favors. I remember I'm in IT, I'm in tech. There was a lady, I forgot her name, that was the head of IT for SARS. And she had an interview about a scandal that was happening with their IT system. And you could see just from how she was talking, Losisi, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Yeah. Making millions per year, she does not know what she's talking about. So the question for me is, how did you get into that role? Who do you owe favors to, and who owes you favors? And that's the structure and the culture that I see within the government that we have. Andrew Feinstein spoke after the party. He breaks it down about how within the ANC, you do not go against the party. Yeah. Especially during the Mbeki years, as much as I have a lot of respect for that man, he is very much an Anglophile. He is very much an Anglophile, and with keeping to that tradition of the West, even Umalema spoke about how Polokwane happened because there were certain factions in the ANC that were afraid that this man would become Umugabe at some point, because he was on his second term and still wanted a third term. How, but and the fact that it was a scandal how he was untoppled, and the person that overtook him, it didn't make sense. And it did not make sense. Like, guys, what's the plan here? Yeah. That's the moment that I think South Africa took short left. Polokwane.
Yeah, no, it is.
There was I always bring up Ukikaba as being one of the bright lights in the early days in the ANC, and look where he is now. There's this culture of Susan's smart, man. Yeah. Because Home Affairs was a joke before that guy took over. Home Affairs was a joke, and for whatever his faults are, people have faults. How does that happen? How can you not have a culture of cultivating young talent, of excellence, and let someone go astray like that? Because Uping Oklaput.
Now he's moving his way back. However, maybe starting with Ukikaba himself.
Okay.
So remember, Malusi is also in the same grouping with Fikile Mbalula, Julius Malema, and Albegi Mdolo, and when they were still in the Youth League. And because he was also president, he was earmarked apparently. This is not necessarily, no one has ever confirmed it, but it was said in public that he was earmarked to be president. However, now he became too complicit. And I do think that when he was splurging money, being clumsy as a politician in this country, when President Zuma was still the president of the country, then him splurging money, not caring about what everyone has to say, was also very mature-ish. Because I'm sure in the ANC itself there are people who have called him to order. Don't be a social media person too much. Of course, probably everyone else has skeletons, but you don't play it out in the field where everybody must see, right? So he was very unfortunate, but also the ANC itself and the media was very kind to him as a man, right? You have a scandal, it's easier for you to come. People laugh about your scandals. They make jokes about it. But when it's women who are facing the same fate, then it's something different. You are completely written off. So he was just that example within the ANC that this person has made wrong decisions, therefore he then has to suck it up, right? However, we have seen other people within the party. We have done terrible stuff. We have seen people being implicated in serious crimes, but no one has been held to account, right? But now maybe to draw back to that when Beki's term came to an end abruptly, and President Jacob Zuma got in. President Mbeki, even now when he speaks in retrospect, he refers to two eras in government, his era and the current era, right? And he portrays himself as this person who has done amazing work for the country. Economically speaking, and when you look at it from an outside perspective, yes, the economy grew, but the truth of the matter is that the economy was jobless. People were still poor, people not working. So yes, he did work for the country to get more money from foreign direct investment, because as you have said, he gets along very well with the West, right? He's an economist. He spent some time in success, so he has good networks, and also is trusted by the global market, right? So definitely the economy grew. However, people on the ground, people were dying of HIV and AIDS. Poverty was killing people. Crime was not as bad, but there was crime because people were poor. Education, people were trickling into to join institutions of higher learning because of the now this was open, there were institutions being established. So his term, particularly the first term, he just came after Nelson Mandela. Foreign direct investment was coming in strongly, so there was new infrastructure being built, new industries, factories being built. So it was a great time for him. But the second term, we saw that the economy was jobless. So it's not necessarily that he is or was a messiah, or he is the best president that the country has ever seen. Yes, maybe he was better, but clearly is not the best. And then also when President Jacob Zuma took over, and Kutwa now is 9 wasted years, it's not President Jacob Zuma was also only leading. The entire ANC was in government. Cyril Ramaphosa was deputy president. Decisions were made in his presence. Former President Mbeki was also not much involved, but he was still in South Africa. He was still in the political arena. He was in the ANC. So they cannot necessarily not refuse to take accountability. And now going to mistrust them. You can't trust people who refuse to take accountability. Because how do we know that in the next 10 years, aren't you going to say that it was not my fault? You people made it difficult for me to govern. So it's important for leadership to be accountable to its people, but also not to delusion people, assuming that their memory is bad. People can remember the family members they've lost through HIV and AIDS. People, they remember the nights where they went to bed without food. People remember all the things that has happened. They remember the kids who died whilst they were in pit latrines. So we cannot necessarily now neglect these things and assume that people are going to be delusioned and forget because today you're promising a better future.
Why do you think the Zuma years are counted as 9 wasted years? Because I have very interesting views on that one.
Yeah, this is what we're told, that this is 9 wasted years. There were 9 wasted years. And also, the problem, Zuma's term is characterized by a number of things. One, when he led into power, there was a very scandalous the rape case, right? Something that we will never be able to forget because it's how it was rubbed in people's faces. And also, he was not prosecuted. Of course, it was acquitted by the court, but around the case, some people are still very angry about the case. But 2, state capture. State capture where a private jet of a powerful family lands in our military base. This compromises the country's security. People getting tenders in government, not delivering work, prices being inflated, and these things are not public, they're in public domain, right? I do understand that there's a story on the other hand, because of course there's always two sides of a story. The introduction of new media houses, right? Some people are saying that we drive a particular propaganda. But when you look into it, some people say that it was a replacement of one regime by the other. So it was a matter of, we are not with this camp, therefore we must establish our own camp and our own people. Fortunately, unfortunately, the camp came with politicians, service providers, people who are going to ensure that this camp is well kept. Unfortunately for Zuma, the country felt the impact quite deeply, because that's when issues with ESCOM exacerbated. We saw when the military-based, they see that someone is landing in their confines, then that also worries the country. Are we safe as a country? But also we saw people who defended Zuma during the rape trial coming back to say that, I knew. So these things are playing out in the public domain, and the public has opinions and also has feelings of people who, if a prominent case like this is not properly dealt with, imagine the numerous cases on the ground which are also given the same light. Maybe some people now, they die without attaining justice, because we saw precedent with our leader. With the state capture, depending on how you look at it, some people say that it was highlighted because it was done by President Jacob Zuma and was not appealing to what people say the white monopoly capital. He was kind of replacing the group with another. So it's 9 wasted years because of the people's lived experiences, according to me. However, according to media and other people, it could be a thing of, no, this was a spin to just decampaign the president because he was not pleasing the people holding the fort economy. Yes.
Yeah. So, it's interesting for me, the Zuma debate, because on one hand, you have someone who's so controversial, just on paper, rape cases, arms deal scandals, but then when you actually do a deep dive, you realize that there was an attempt at something here, like you were saying, where you're trying to restructure the power centers within the country, where you are moving away from white monopoly capital. But then the attempt for me was not sophisticated enough. Like bridges were being built, universities were being built, tenders were being given and all this, but then the follow through was not sophisticated enough. The bridges that are being built will probably fall apart very soon. The universities that have been built are not properly funded. The tenders that were given, what was the process in doing that? So there is a claim from one side that the Zuma years were the most prosperous for black wealth creation, and to an extent that's true. But the way that it was being done left a lot to be desired. You just look at the very blatant abuses of power that happened during those years. I'm like, but then at the same time, we forget that South Africa is 80% black. We forget that only about 10% of the population has a tertiary education. Yes. And if you look at those numbers, that 80% black, of which a very small percentage of them have tertiary education, they will look at a Zuma type character like, no benzo you're representing us. Yes. Okay, cool, you are doing things there, but at the same time, when the same things that Zuma did, when they were done during apartheid, they seem more legitimate than when they are being done by a black government. People easily forget that South Africa was spending on average 500 million rand between 1970 and 1989 on military spending, at a time when the rand was almost on par with the dollar and the euro. So in that ecosystem, what abuses were happening when you only had to account for 10% of the population. At a time when you were spending 500 million rand a year on military spending during apartheid, you had a South African government that was going against international law because we were the pariah of the world and giving oil to Israel. No questions were asked about that. And yet similar transactions happening post-94, knowing that white monopoly capital controls the media, owns the key people that make decisions, and can then paint the picture of how things are viewed. Very few people have the...
well, we can't use the apartheid yardstick to actually... But the apartheid was a very corrupt government. Very corrupt, very inconsistent, very unaccountable to anyone. But also the apartheid government did well in the first few years of apartheid because white population was quite minority. So they were servicing the few, but also remember it did not have much administration to worry about. It had only the 4 Bantustans, provinces, whatever that you want to call it. And it also industrialized and gave tenders and jobs and senior positions to their own people. So they kept it home. They kept it home whilst ensuring that every other black person is on the periphery of any leadership or any success of sort, right? So apartheid targeted few people. So imagine now this new dispensation, democratic dispensation, it comes in, there's 80% of black people who are all wanting a chance in life, right? So it's going to be quite difficult to navigate the space. But also, remember, apartheid also did not end because they were willing, they wanted to, right? It's because they were running out of funds. They were destabilized. The international community was also on our side. So now they were forced into negotiations, right? As they were negotiating on a position where we are packing our bags, we are leaving, right? So even in the negotiation, they try to destroy some infrastructure to ensure that you don't inherit what we have. So we're going to, like ESCOM, for instance. Yes, we might blame the government that they have not done much at ESCOM, but ESCOM was built to cater for a few. So now there's a need to actually capacitate ESCOM and ensure that you build more. And when the apartheid in the 1990 and late 1980s leading to 1990, the release of Nelson Mandela, they were not just relaxing, waiting for ANC government to take over. They knew that we are going to be out of power for a very long time. So they tried to get as much as possible for themselves to ensure their wealth. Hence now we can't even redress land question to an end because they made sure that we want to make sure that we are fine, we are safe, and then we go into negotiation, right? So as much as we want to make the comparison between what we call the 1990 wasted years by Jacob Zuma and the apartheid government, the black government that led, it had so much on their shoulders to ensure that everyone is catered for. However, we don't have really good leaders in this country, especially those ones who are in our faces, who are leading us. They are unaccountable. They refuse to. They put themselves first more than the citizens, and they are. Over time, we've seen them being corrupt. They've taken a lot of funds. They have not been prosecuted. There's nothing that has happened. They continue unabated to actually be corrupt. Hopefully in the next election we'll find a new set of leaders.
And what do you expect to happen in these upcoming elections?
Yeah, I do expect that we'll have maybe a coalition. The ANC one would become, if it below 45%, then they'll have to be forced to go into coalition with different parties. Maybe the EFF will come in second because the DA has not been doing very well. And also whenever it's in the media, there's always something that they are saying that is not necessarily representative of the party itself and what they stand for. So the DA is quite shaky. Then the EFF, the three parties might be the ANC, EFF, and the DA. However, now kingmakers in the coalition becomes the smaller parties. Because let's say the ANC gets 45%, right? It needs a party with a small margin of, let's say, 4 or 3%, let's say Action SA or Patriotic Alliance, then they get to govern, right? But now it's going to be a very interesting debate because it's a numbers game. If the ANC has more numbers, then it makes the first choosing, right? It's the king of sort. Then if the EFF has, then it also would be able to say, no, we don't want to have coalition with the ANC, as they've said before. The DA might want to join forces with the ANC based on the numbers. This is regardless of the fact that there is the moonshot, the multi-charter party, DA leading ECDP and other organizations. It's a pre-alliance of sort that we might be in coalition if we have more numbers as the multi-party charter. However, now with the elections, with the campaigns, we have not been seeing them together much. We have not been seeing their maybe similar positions in terms of policy offerings. No, each party is campaigning on their own, which is not bad because they are also running away from basking in one another's light. So if SADP is campaigning with the DA, chances of it not being seen by people are very high because the DA has more numbers. So they're campaigning differently, but they have an alliance that if things come to shove, we must co-align. We're going to align and ensure that we have a government, but they might not make even 50%, right? But now looking into the DA, ANC, EFF, and maybe the MK. The MK and the ANC might find each other because they are coming from the same party. So, brothers and sisters, when they fight, we are fighting today, but when you get home, let's talk because we are siblings, right? So ANC and MK might align because MK will not get even 20% of the votes.
Yeah.
So they will have to be pushed into a coalition. Then EFF, they have said they will not have a coalition with the DA, but we'll see they keep on changing. They change. We've seen them in KZN. We've seen them in Swane. We've seen them in Nelson Mandela Bay. They've have coalition with the DA. So
and it never works out.
It never works out. So we are going to see with this game of numbers and then who becomes the kingmaker, particularly in the small parties.
Do you anticipate a situation where the president might not be from the ANC in that coalition?
Yes, there is that possibility, but see now also it depends on which parties are kingmakers in the coalition, because we do see prominent figures within the various organizations. For instance, if the ANC would get the presidency, President Cyril Ramaphosa, or EFF, Julius Malema, DA Steenhuisen, MK, we're still not sure. And you go to Action SA, Herman, you go to Gayton Mackenzie's party, Patriotic Alliance himself. There is and also we must not undermine the presence of independent candidates, right? And these organizations, because they have people who can appeal to the base of all political organizations. Because if they make it to parliament, and then coalitions are established, then they can be able to lobby the various organizations to say that we can put us in there, you are going to tell us what to do as it happens. Look what happened in Johannesburg. Who would have thought that Al Jamaa would have a mayor? Because they did not have numbers in the council. However, they were able to lobby, and also the parties were able to trust them because they don't have much political power to do whatever that they want. So they are going to be given this power, but the organizations are going to be driving the leader to wherever the direction they wanted. So we could have a chance that unless the coalitions happen, that a president is not from the prominent political organizations.
And what would that mean for South Africa's ICJ case?
So the ICJ case and with the many other, even the bills that have been passed, it's a government decision. And I do see that with other people, they say it as, ANC position, right? But fundamentally, the country itself, the government of the country has agreed that this is a case we want to pursue. However, then it's led...
Even the DA?
No, the DA is... the DA itself and its pragmatic stance, it's the one party that even Patriotic Alliance, have a different stance on the Israel-Palestine situation. However, the majority, the government, so even, for instance, in Parliament, if a resolution has been passed in Parliament, the principle is, then it's a decision of the Parliament. Whether you have beaten by numbers, you have little numbers, and the other party has more numbers, but the truth of the matter is, you lost debate up to a point where Parliament had to take a resolution to this. So let's say through this vote in Parliament, right? People debate, you can sway colleagues. And then there's voting. Some parties lose on voting because they have numbers represented. It happens, it's politics, is like that. And the basics of politics is to be able to lobby each other. So if you fail in doing that, then the decision is going to be taken by Parliament, whether it's Parliament or it's Council. Then it's a binding decision by everyone. And then it's disingenuous for the different parties to come out and say, we did not want that. You were there. We were never silenced. However, you're beaten by numbers. So it's important that as a politician, you practice the idea of being able to negotiate, but also concede when you have lost the numbers, right? So cases like for the ICJ case, I don't think it will be rescinded. I don't think there is a need for that because this is the government's decision. But secondly, the decision that South Africa resonates with, right? We can speak about the semantics of why aren't you supporting Sudan? Why aren't you supporting the DRC? Why are those things? We can discuss those separately. But fundamentally, South Africa, South Africans understand what the Palestinians are going through. They've been in that same situation. So it's important that they take a stance to actually provide comfort and also represent them when they can't even be represented, you see. So that I don't think that would be rescinded to Parliament. And also the budget has also been there. Like currently the ICJ has ruled that I hope they arrest Netanyahu, throw away the keys with his counterparts and everyone else. But South Africa has been heard by the ICJ, even if next government decides not to pursue the case anymore. But at least this ground has been leveled. And the other countries as well have seen more than 20 countries now recognizing Palestine. This is the work that South Africa has done and has started. So.
But I want to get back to the key conversation, but I also want to divert to the ICJ's ruling of issuing a warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and his war minister. I do not see anything happening from the ICJ case. I do not see anything happening from the warrant that's been issued because the precedent has already been set in the past where the ICJ made rulings and they do not have the means to enforce their rulings. I'm taken back to 2004 when they were told they would have to step away from a certain portion of the West Bank that they had illegally occupied, of which I think now there are 700,000 settlers in the West Bank. Under international law, it's illegal for them to be there. They were told to leave in this one particular section in 2004. That never happened. They were told to destroy a bridge that they were building on that land. That never happened. So as much as things might change when we have a new government, I do not think, even if things don't change and this case moves forward, that anything is going to come from it. But what is interesting for me is the fact that the case was brought forward in the first place. For me, that marks a shift. It marks a shift that says South Africa is no longer willing, to an extent, to be bullied or dictated to by the West, and the emergence of BRICS is a big part of that. But it makes me uncomfortable because the BRICS member nations do not have a strong history of democracy. And having a government that is mostly still run by the ANC, even after the election, is still going to be mostly ANC, and the culture that we've seen the ANC foster in the past 30 years, it makes me very uncomfortable that they are so close to China because they're going for conferences, they're going for training. I saw posters in Chinese a couple of days ago. I'm
yeah.
like, Aibo, like, what? What are you saying? What are you saying to me? You know, like, I haven't seen a poster in Venda.
Sure.
You know, I haven't seen a poster in what are the other smaller tribes? I haven't seen though. Like, I always see Zulu, Afrikaans, and English, and yet now we have Mandarin. Hi, bo guys, what are you saying to me?
They're not voting.
So I am hopeful, and at the same time, I'm cautious of that. What's your take on our participation in BRICS?
Okay, the participation in BRICS. I do think that BRICS is an alternative. So remember, there has been economic blocs, like G8, G7, G44. So then those blocs have been led or dictated mostly by countries from the West, right? So BRICS is a bloc to actually push back, to say that we countries in the global south, we also want to establish our own ground. Because remember, in the international politics, global economy and the rules, they're constantly changing, and the rules are determined by the parties that have more power. So countries like the USA, countries in Europe, Russia, and they make the rules, and also they make rules comfortable for each other, because they know very well that they still are competing with each other. Meanwhile, but resources, they get them from the countries in the global south, unfortunately. So BRICS they have established BRICS as a pushback against the existing block of economy. However, BRICS also established the New Development Bank. New Development Bank is similar to what the World Bank is, or what the IMF is. But in terms of the funding, the countries in BRICS cannot contribute to the bank enough to ensure that they have sufficient money to cater for all of the countries. So now, if you don't have money to back up your decision, then your decision is likely not to happen. Yeah, you are unlikely to actually take a very serious stance against something. So with the existence of BRICS, I do note the fact that it is a progressive economic bloc to ensure that the countries in the global south are represented and they make their own rules. The involvement of China, Russia, and them not necessarily big democratic states, it's something that I remember some analysts were talking about it, that what if it kind of rubs off to South Africa, and South Africans, they like flirting with China's progressive nature in terms of industries and economy. But also, a country's success is not only tied to its economy, it's also tied to the quality of lives of the people on the ground. So countries like China, people, yes, they are working, people have work. However, the work that they do they see themselves as being seen at the workplaces? What kind of injustices they are faced with? Are they able to speak when they don't like what the government is doing? Are they able to hold the government accountable? How are the elections? People do not look into those things when they speak about countries like China, and we should look up into China. And also, in the BRICS itself, what fundamentals as principles that are binding us? If China is doing something that we do not agree with as a South Africa, are we able to call China to order? If then we can't hold them to order, but yet we are in the same economic bloc, because the economy cannot succeed on its own. It needs a political will, it needs social capacity of the citizens themselves. So it's important that people are roped in, but also roped in from the different countries, right? But the countries themselves and their leaders must be able to be not accountable, but to resonate with the rest of the squad, right? Because it's one thing to say, we are here to just make money, but in terms of how you are as a person, your lifestyle, that is something that we're not sure about. Then it's not necessarily going to succeed. But I do. I hope BRICS continues. I saw the DA saying that there was. So I hope the BRICS continues, but to open up also for traveling, because if you've traveled to the BRICS countries, at least now you don't need visas for some countries and that is quite important, because if you are a country and you are unable to visit other countries, your citizens, how are they going to be able to explore opportunities, right? And two, if then these countries in the BRICS blocks, they also trade with each other, at least it increases the capacity of the country, but also we are not now tied to pleasing the West because we want to trade with them. And they can't just determine the rules willy-nilly as they did before, because now we have an option. So so BRICS is quite progressive in that regard, but hopefully with the arrangement of the bank and how the contributions parties, they contribute all equally, but some can't afford. So China has contributed more. What does it mean? Because you have more money, you get to make more decisions. So those things need to be cleared out.
The praise that's usually thrown towards China's way is that they are replacing the West as an imperial master. You know, they are saying, we are here to help you because we know what it means to be subjugated. You know, they have a deep history of that. They've been around for thousands of years, and they've been taken over by different civilizations, different other nations over those thousands of years, but they've always remained as one. The unfortunate thing, though, is South Africa is a very young country, you know, compared to China. As a culture, we are very young. As a democracy, we are very young. As an identity, we are very fractured, you know. The Chinese are 90-something% Han Chinese. So that the equivalent would be if South Africa was 95% Zulu or 95% Venda, whatever. We do not have that. And because we do not have that, and we are not too far removed from colonization, not too far removed from apartheid, it's going to be very difficult for us to emulate China. We will find ourselves in a position, I suspect, where we will either have to conform towards Chinese norms, and if we do that, we will lose the opportunity to actually build or establish an African or South African Renaissance. An example of this that's been attempted on the continent is Paul Kagame. You know, another example is, who is this young man, this 30-something-year-old Burkina Faso? I think it's easier in those countries because they are smaller, they're not really in the world view, so they can get away with doing a lot until maybe at a later stage the world might pay attention. But for South Africa, with our history and the different backgrounds that we share, it's like we are being pulled, you know, it's like we are being pulled, and the act of pulling for me seems to be the most adamant attempt to decolonize ourselves, but the path is not clear, you know. What are your thoughts on our attempts to decolonize ourselves?
Actually, it's Africa Day today. Happy Africa Day.
Happy Africa Day.
So with decolonization, I think there's been a project that has happened, like 1945 Manchester Conference, and we've seen Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana trying, but you know, with the West, they're quite quick with identifying when a person is on the trajectory to decolonize. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana was the first president, and we look into Paul Kagame tried with the African Union, but when we look at Thomas Sankara, what he did with Burkina Faso back then, it was proper decolonization, because it's not only decolonization in terms of theory, or I will not go to Europe. It was a matter of how do you see yourself as a leader in society. That it did not necessarily succumb to what leadership looks like according to Western terms. He said, we as public servants, myself included, we are going to drive same cars, we're going to get clothing from people from the country, we are going to ensure that we prioritize education, prioritize our own local industries, right? So that was decolonization for me. But also, when you look into what Paul Kagame was trying to do, let's not speak about Rwanda itself, because people have different ideas of what's really happening in Rwanda. And some people are in Rwanda, the country is clean, people are seemingly they are doing well, however, people are not happy, right? So that is maybe some Rwandans will be able to tell the story themselves. You can't necessarily take the agency from them. But when you look into what Paul Kagame stood for at the AU, saying that they're seeing us as different entities, as the 55 member states, they call us to their countries, Africa, Europe, Africa, UK, Africa, America, Africa, China, all of them. They call all these 55 states, and I can imagine in the one discussion, there was like a round table. All of these men from Africa, they come and see one man, Macron, in France. Why are they seen as these people, and then this one? It's more like undermining them, that I'll come, I'm just alone, and then they are coming as an entire African Union, 55 member states. And the one problem that also Ruto spoke about when he spoke was referring to decolonization. William Ruto from Kenya, he said these presidents, when they invite us individually, and you come discuss your own issues as a president of a particular country. And he says that we cannot divorce the fact that African issues are similar. We have issues of land dispossession, we have landlessness in the country, people are in poverty, our mineral resources are mined and then they're exported. So these are the challenges we all have. Why aren't we discussing as one entity to say that we want access to our mineral resources, we want to ensure that the rules are made by us because these are our resources. 2, we want it back, we want our land back. We want to change the education system. Those things, because they cut across, right? But I guess there's not a politicians are not willing to actually decolonize fully. We last saw it with Thomas Sankara, and recently with Paul Kagame, who is also, we don't know what's happening now, because he is no longer the chairperson of the African Union, and he's been quiet about decolonization. But and when we look into decolonization, and as an academic myself, you look at it at school in the sense that you want to protest or rebel against Western norms, right? But also our leadership must ensure that they protect democracy, and not just democracy as a concept, but the democracy that reflects people on the ground. This idea that when politicians visit communities, they have an entourage of 8 cars, that when they go to communities, they have bodyguards with it, particularly when they come to address issues, right? And yet, when they want to campaign for votes, they come, they hug everyone. The safety issues now are no longer a concern, right? What is it? Are you infantilizing these people? Are you assuming that they can think, they can see that the one day you came with guards and you could not even shake your hand, but I was the one who voted for you. If I wanted you dead, I would not have put my ex there. However, now when they come for elections, they are hugging people, they're asking them their issues. Aren't you patronizing these people? And as people, as Africans, we never patronize people. This thing came with colonization. Secondly, when we speak on issues of gender-based violence, do we look into them as a matter of, oh, it's just men, they are violent? What makes these men to be violent? Why aren't we looking in issues like the society breeds men who are violent? Why is society like that? Because people are in poverty, people, particularly many men have grown up without fathers. Why their fathers were absent? Because they were pushed to go to the mines and mine. And they never spend time with their children to teach them good manners and end. Then violence has the language used, because the violence was introduced through colonization, and also with the experts in there when they find gold and mineral resources. There was violence. It was violent every day. So when they come back to their houses, they are violent. Society becomes violent, right? Apartheid was violent. People now probably don't know what other language to use without violence. So those things could be articulated properly if they use African lens into looking into things. But now we want to use Western ideas, Western concepts. Oh, this is how we must fix it. This is how we must do. Hence, they can't articulate the land question. Hence, they still discussing on, do we amend Section 25? Because they don't understand fundamentally that land is life to people.
To black people, to Africans.
To Africans, exactly. It's life. And how was land? Now, we must discuss whether land was stolen or not. Why did we have 100 years of wars in the Eastern Cape? Are fighting. They were fighting for their land because they were being pushed. Why did we have the Battle of Isandlwana? You know, those issues, they could be clearly, easily articulated if they take an African position. But you know what? Now they want to, our politicians, they want to appeal to the global market, and they never address issues locally. Hence, now decolonization will be a thing that it's an utopia that will always aspire to be.
The closest attempt in South Africa in terms of decolonizing is Natal for me. The negotiation tactic of the IFP during the CODESA meetings was, it was foolish, but it ended up working very well in their favor. Because in South Africa, without Natal on the ballot, would have been a South Africa in turmoil. You know, and they recognized that when the negotiations were breaking down. I remember being told the story of how the jet was being fueled for Buthelezi as he was about to go back to Durban from OR Tambo, and there is a negotiator from the National Party that said, if that man gets on that plane, everything we've worked for is out, you know. And 30 years later, Zulu people are amongst the wealthiest in South Africa. Why? Because they have a portion of their land.
Yes.
You know, there is a trust, and the closer you are to the powers that be of that trust, the more powerful and more influential your life might be. But then it still trickles down to the average Zulu person having a very clear identity of themselves. Yes. You know, they have a very clear identity of their language. I'm from the Eastern Cape. It's rare that I can speak Xhosa in a full paragraph without using an English word somewhere in there. You know, it's very rare. And yet, whenever I meet a Zulu person, rich or poor, but it is Zulu. True and true. You know, there's a very strong identity of self within that culture. And we do not have that as the greater South Africa. We are very fractured. You have the ANC, the EFF, and the DA as the biggest parties in the country. And you have one party, the DA, that often props up black people, but then the real core of that party is not black. You know, you look at the interests that they push, which are not to the benefit of most black people, but they will have a black person as the face of the party. You have the ANC, for as much as they might be the official opposition of the DA, or the DA is the official opposition of the ANC, and I suspect, as you mentioned, that that's going to change in these upcoming elections, because I do suspect that the EFF is going to overtake the DA. The ANC, for the most part, is protecting the same interest that the DA is protecting. It's just that they are more radical than the DA and are not as empathetic as the DA seems to be at times. It's interesting again that you bring up the observation of how when it's election season, when they come into communities, they're shaking hands and friendly, and there's no convoy of 18 cars and whatnot. There's a video that's going around on social media of the girl that's asking the president for a job, and he's telling her about the app. I'm like, that's like meeting with Father Christmas, dude, and him telling you about the Easter bunny. You know, soon. I'm like, what? How? There isn't a clear African identity in South Africa. There isn't a Pan-Africanist identity. And for when it comes to Pan-Africanism, unfortunately, it's usually associated with violence or militancy. But Pan-Africanism just says, if you are a resident of this continent, then you have no other allegiances besides the people of this land and the cultures of this land. Very few parties embody that. You know, very few parties embody that. And the key reason for me why that's the case is because the wealth of the country, or the wealth of the continent, is not solely with its inhabitants, you know, and money is power. And in South Africa, money is a weapon. When you have these independent candidates for the presidency having totally unexpected views depending on who's speaking. There's a part, I won't mention names, there's a part where this colored woman is being asked about the Palestine-Israel issue, and the answer is so vague, and she's not able to use certain words because she's being funded by people that do not want her to use certain words. And I'm like, as a colored woman being asked about the plight of the Palestinians, can you not put yourself in their position? You know, having lived through apartheid because she's of a certain age, having known the experiences of subjugated or subjugation, can you not have the empathy to overlook anything else? But then when this is a weapon, it's very powerful because the politics of the stomach, they override our ethics at times, you know? And I think in an attempt to decolonize, there really has to be a radical restructuring of our society where our education has to be leveled. Because a child is not born knowing that they're black or white. A child is not born knowing that they're poor or rich. But our educational system, being private and public, teaches them where they stand, you know, and you inherit this inferiority complex depending on which side you fall on, and you inherit the superiority complex depending on which side you fall on. Whether you're black or white, you are the child of a politician that goes to a private school, you do not really identify as easily as your black brother and sister going to the public school. You are more, like you were talking about your friend, you are more aligned with, you know. So I think that's where it starts for me. Sure. Education. Level the playing ground. You know, level the playing ground and things will happen. The true measure of a first world or developed nation is, do the basics that the state provide, is that enough for everyone to have a chance at the same goals in life, at the same opportunities in life? And the answer is no, then you are not a developed nation. And South Africa has never been a developed nation, and yet there are certain quarters within the country that talks about pre-94 as South Africa being a developed nation. For some, it was. You know, for some, it was. And the planning and the foresight of the powers that be, I really have to commend them. Even though it affected my life detrimentally and the lives of people that look like me and you, the planning and the foresight to know how to structure things to suit you decades ahead of schedule is brilliant. It's really brilliant, because in this country, if you are a black person and you want to give your children the best money can offer, you will become a minority in this country, even though you are a majority. But financially, you are a minority, because if you take your children to the best schools, they're going to be a minority as a black person. If you take your family to the best healthcare, you're going to be a minority there. And how are you seen in those spaces is very important, you know. I have a lot of people that I consider my mentors that are older than me, and their views on things, you can tell the influence of having been raised under apartheid versus me, who was born in 93 and having lived the life that I've lived. You can tell what I see as being acceptable and unacceptable is totally different from what someone who's maybe 10 or 20 years older than me. You know, the question you raised the fact that apartheid was not something that was just done because people felt like it. It was the law of the land, you know. But when we look at it through that lens, why don't we talk about the morality of it at the same time? Because when they talk about the 92 referendum as being the white population's decision to end apartheid, we then do not talk about the morality of why it began in the first place. You know, we wash away that, you know, let's disregard that. But then we ended it. But why did it start?
Sure.
And what are the effects of it since it started? You know, we don't talk about those things. Man.
Yeah.
My next question for you is, what is an African feminist as opposed to a Western idea of what feminism is to you?
Okay, so when you're looking into feminism, and there was a wave in South Africa where we young black women, there was also black pictures. If you're like wearing a duke, you have a red lip, you're sitting in, you dress in a particular way, you're seen as this one is a feminist, right? And of course, the aesthetic of it, it's not something that does not necessarily matter, but and also that period, and I remember a period from 2013, even leading to Fees Must Fall, in 2014, people identified as, particularly women in institutions of higher learning, identified themselves as feminists, right? But also the feminism that we're introduced to is the feminism that started in Europe, right? The first wave, the second wave, the third wave. Truth of the matter was that we did not necessarily 100% relate with that kind of feminism, because that kind of feminism saw society is bad for women, because there's a white man, then there's a white woman, then there's a black man, then the black woman. So the struggles that white women were facing in Europe are quite different from the struggles that black women are facing in Africa, because we are seen as the least important people in the food chain, right? Meanwhile, for them, they are seen as the second in the food chain, coming after the men, right? And feminism, of course, started because people wanted suffrage. They wanted to be able to vote. They didn't trust that there should only be one person. A man should go and make decisions. Women also deserve to have the chance to vote. But looking into African feminism insists to identify that Africa itself was not patriarchal before colonization, right? And when we look into the history currently, we saw the movie where Thuso Mbeki was part of, Woman King. When we saw Woman King, Woman King is a depiction of how back then, in case of military action, women were involved, right? There was never a situation where, because you are a woman, therefore you can't, right? Based on your ability, and you are women, we're going to fight, you have the ability to fight, you go and fight, right? So people like Adebayo are actually debunking the fact that African men are patriarchal in nature, but African men have made to be patriarchal because of how colonialism came into effect in Africa. But also, the patriarchy also came with, unfortunately, religion. The idea that God is a man, particularly the Christian religion that came with the missionaries, that man is God. Women must worship their husbands. Women must do A, B, C, and D. Right. So African feminism look into the injustice not as an isolated case of feminists, of only women. They see it as a societal problem that women are abused in South Africa. What leads to this abuse? What's wrong with these men? What has made these men to actually abuse women? But also now, when it looks at the role of the women in society, does not locate them only in the kitchen. And this is based on literature, that in hunter-gatherers, during the hunter-gatherers period, women were hunters, right? They were the ones who go and look for food. Sometimes they plow and. So we have seen this through history. So now when we hear that women cannot only belong in the kitchen, it's something that is new. So the African feminism pushes back to say that women have been important in society. Therefore, it's a matter of restructuring again. And this is not necessarily to neglect the fact that women in Africa right now, they feel patriarchy the most, right? I'll say the most because I'm located in Africa. This is my positionality. Probably someone in Asia or wherever, they feel like they are the most, they feel patriarchy the most. But also patriarchy kills men in Africa. We have seen statistics. When you look into the African statistics, the rate of suicide, mostly it's men. Why are they busy killing themselves? The burden that we as society have put on men makes it difficult for them to be their own being without society dictating how they should live, right? Also with women, there is seldom chances where you see women are just maybe given opportunities because they can. There's always conditionalities around it. Oh, we'll give you because we want a woman. Oh, we'll give you because you are young and black. There's always conditionalities, but when a man is given an offer, it's a matter of that we are giving you where we hope that you're going to do well, right? So the ground is never level. And I think the work for African feminism should start at home before it starts at school. Start at home, the way you treat your children, the way you give labor chores to your children. You don't necessarily confine women in the kitchen. You allow your children to be as free as possible to do what they're able to do and they excel in. Then we'll not have a society where a man has to lift 50 kg cement even if they can't. And if they can't, they feel like they failed society because they're unable to portray the masculine power that society expects them to have. So that's where my African feminism comes from. But also with feminism, and it has been used as sometimes for the wrong reasons, I'll say, to actually undo some of the fundamental cultures and traditions that African people have. There are practices that African people do and they believe in, and they know very well what they're doing. It's not like, but because now it's not put on paper and intellectualized, they seem like, it's not proper. These people, they feel type away. For instance, the women who go for Umkhosi Uhlang, they were called to say, no, let's abolish this thing. It's not serving the women. Have they complained in their presence and say we are being mistreated there? Is it injustice? Is it something? Are they being molested there? If not, allow people to do.
But it's only women, right?
It's only women, right? And allow people to do that. And at some point, Zulu leadership had to actually stand up and say, this is our practice. We know very well why we're doing this thing, and we are not going to tell you as different NGOs who want to, or at least we want details of what really happens there. We won't tell you on the basis that you want to take our work and publish it there. This is our thing, all right, and it's close to our heart. Equally with Ulwalugu Kwaqhosa, when there is some news that some young men have died. And now there's claims that you should abolish Ulwaluko altogether, not understanding the intricacies that goes into it with the different cultures. So the feminism from the West is quick to actually call out what they don't understand, right? And also this is to annihilate our own cultures and traditions. The next thing we are going to be just human beings. We won't be umdu because ungumdu based on what you do. And your culture. So African feminism, we do not want to erase and annihilate cultures, but of course culture change with people. It's not something that is stagnant. So when you see that there's something wrong that is happening, you change it. You are human beings, and Africans have always you can look into history. Africans have always known how the world changes, and the civilization has been driven them for the very long time.
The disadvantage that Africans find themselves is that they are not reflected in the world.
Yes.
Africans are not reflected in the world. They're not reflected in the history of the world. The story of Africans starts with slavery for some reason.
Yes.
I saw a comment on a video on TikTok of one of these referendum party people that want the Western Cape to be its own country. And this guy, what's his name? Something White. His surname is W-Y-A-T-T.
Oh, Barry White is a singer, right?
No, not him.
Right.
But one of the things he was saying is Africa and South Africa would be nowhere if the white man was not here. He was saying so many things. I'm like, I believe that man believes that because he's grown up in a world where his name and his face is reflected all over the place. And anything that is black is usually reflected in a negative sense. What is the effect of that on the people that are black? You know?
Yes.
Do you find the phenomena when people move from the rurals to the big cities, or maybe they move overseas or whatever, and they start adopting these Eastern philosophies like Zen and meditation and yoga and all these beliefs, and I'm like, everything you adopt from the East as umdu upuma Islalin, I am sure you can find that Islalin, but it does not have the sexy name that you know, it's not hot yoga or no, nje zizithethe zabantu, zizenzo zabantu, zinjongo zabantu. And if you grow up in a world where ezozithethe were not reflected in them, uzozixabisa nje.
Yes.
They're not going to hold much significance to you. So that's the challenge that we have. The challenge is it almost seems impossible, but Nelson Mandela said,
seems impossible
until it's done.
Yes. But you know what? There's something that I like doing. My grandfather passed on in 2020, right? And my father passed on in 2022. And you know, I always when now, because now the world I'm more enlightened, I'm like, oh, Utata, this is what he meant, you know. With issue with what you call this, mental health issues and therapy. So I was talking to some friends. They're like, oh, you know, for men it's quite difficult for them to go to therapy. They find it they are being emasculated, right? And I remember my grandfather, whenever there was something, let's say he has a disagreement with my grandmother at home, right? Or there's something that's bothering him in the household, he would go next door to his mate. Ne? They'll sit on the veranda. Sometimes as a kid, I would just go and also play there next door, right? They'll sit there, probably hear a bit of chat here and there. Then they'll be listening to birds sitting on the veranda, meditating on what my grandfather has told him to be an issue. Trust me, the next when he comes back home, you see a change of light. He has a different approach, or he has processed this thing, he has a solution for it. And I'm like, that was sort of therapy, because he went to speak to somebody. If he was fuming inside, now he has subsided, right? But this thing that we do not have different ways of dealing with issues that life throws at us, it's a lie. Africans have always known how to deal with issues. Secondly, when also again, one thing that I find that tickles my interest, right? Whenever I'm home in the villages and I see how life is lived, right? I'm from a very serious village, Kwaztanen, right? You see the allocation of labor, the way people know that if there is a funeral at a particular house, there's no need for you to be blasting loud music. We respect the dead. We know very well we must contribute as a village to ensure that household, the lights are still on. We must ensure that someone is going to come at the household, or family members are going to sleep there with the children if an elder person has passed. Someone is going to come and hold umtandas, things like that. Because Africans, they care for the person inside more than the person outside. Because when you have lost someone, you need someone to comfort you, right? But also, we'll see imikitini when we have umkiti, right? The role that women play, the role that men play. I'm not sure how safe I am with this, but I always find it fantastic that to debunk that women are not part of Gwaluka and stuff like that, right? Oh, mama, not involved. I'm not involved in doing. What do you mean? What is it? What else do you want them to be involved in? What is it? Where are they missing? Because you see very well, but the roles are quite defined properly. The mother, umntana uzokoluka uyazila notata wekhaya bayaziwa, but everyone else ba where uzilile, you're not found everywhere. You're not found saying anything because there's this process, right? On the day itself, mama, they're not sleeping in their households. They are doing something on the other side. Or they are doing something on the other side. Leading towards their coming back. The mother has their role to play. There's this thing, what do you call it? I'm not sure if people, they want fascination with wanting to know what you don't know, right? So now women are pushed to, why are you not going to the forest as well. Why ungayoni entabeni? What are you going to do there? Right? What are women going to do there? And trust me, I don't know if there's a black woman who has said, I want to go and check there, unless there's an issue. There's a problem with their child. But normal circumstances, when the father of the child is present, they're able to go, they come back, give feedback to him, is still fine. You see the father also with the behavior that the child is still fine. So there's clear lines of communication, of information sharing, and it's never, and people act as if this is a secret. It's never a secret, it's a private situation. So there's a way of actually being able to involve everyone, even women. As a young kid, I cooked for Uputuam and took food for him for the first week. So the lie that women are not involved in that, the mother cooks, I send the food our women. So what else do we want, So this is the kind of feminism we must be able to unlearn, that try to negate the importance of the activities that we do, and also to refuse to intellectualize them just because they are not in books. And maybe just to conclude this part on, this is the same thing with people saying, I'm getting married and I have a traditional wedding today, tomorrow I have a white wedding. Hi, they are both traditional weddings.
I agree.
The white party decide to extend it in olive branch to the other culture to do it,
that
right?
would never do the same.
Yes, and so those things, and if a person now, they take the white wedding is more important than the traditional wedding, because on the white wedding they also do things that are cringe sometimes. I have a guest list. People must confirm if they are coming. People must, those things, like you must maintain. It's whiteness. There's nothing fascinating about it, and there's nothing wrong with doing that.
Nothing.
If you feel like, do it. But that should not be used to actually paint black the black culture, and also deem it as something that is not as important, or is something not intellectual, and something that you cannot gain knowledge out of. And the one other thing that also fascinates me in the village is when listening to women speak when there's like they're in the house, they're sitting, maybe they're discussing their issues, right? Or when I'm listening to we call it Mbolocho, right? But and you hear young black men speak to each other. I'm always in awe of how the respect, the use of language, the importance of language. It's out of this world, right? I'm like, you. And sometimes in my village they will say, oh, Yolokazi has gone to school, and so there's that level. But when I marvel at how they speak and how they and the language they use, and I'll always be reminded by Ngungi. I think it's Ngungi who say, language is not just a string of words. It's culture, it's communication, right? So those things are important to me. They matter. And if you can't learn from those things or lived experiences in your communities, and I doubt if you'll be able to articulate yourself properly in understanding Western literature.
I was 17 years old, in Ndaben.
Yeah.
And for the life of me, I only did it because my uncles at the time were still very much alive, and they had played a part in my life, in my upbringing. And for that reason, I felt compelled to respect the tradition, because this is someone, my uncle was almost 20 years older than my father. And he had taken my father to initiation. He had taken his other younger brothers to initiation.
Yeah.
And then when the time for me and my cousins to go, me being the boy that went to an Afrikaans primary school, an English high school, I did not really identify well with my culture.
Sure.
And my father's family are Tswana.
Okay.
But I grew up in the Eastern Cape, Nabakos. And so I did not really have a connection with it. I went through the process. Sure. It was 3 months long. But I can tell you that how many years later, 15 years later, I still find myself going, That's why.
This is what they meant. I love those moments.
What?
Yes,
Yo!
love those moments.
I'll find myself in a meeting, and I work for an international company. So I'll find myself in a meeting with people from all over the world. And in those moments where, okay, the meeting is quieting down, or I'm not talking or anything like that, I'll be humming a song that I was taught 15 years ago in some mountain, and it gives me so much comfort. You know, like I feel okay in those moments. You know, I have an appreciation for the principles that were instilled in me. But I can confidently say that I would never take my son through that process because the world is not compatible with those teachings. You know, it's just not compatible with those teachings. In the same way that you're talking about the Xhosa wedding and the white wedding being traditions, it's unfortunate that the one tradition is not something that you will find on TV. And so I cannot really blame anyone that wants a white wedding, because from the moment they were a little girl, that's all they saw on Disney. You know, that's all they are orientated to, you know. And in an attempt for us to try and walk away from westernized lives and decolonize ourselves from Western cultures and ideals and values, we really need to start adopting and appreciating what we have. And unfortunately, we don't.
We and also the stakes are against us, right? It's very difficult to appreciate. And particularly, I will always feel for young black people who have gone to what we call multiracial schools, right? And we're staying in townships for so many things. And maybe I've heard some of them articulating maybe what they went through at that particular time. So for instance, your case, you stay in a township, right? And then you go to a multiracial school. These are two different worlds. At school, you get into the gate, you are told, you don't speak your language here. You speak English, right? The culture itself is not symbolic of any sort of your culture. You are told we are going to have a sleepover, you are going to do this and that. You are told to call your teacher by first name, teacher Rebecca. But at home you are taught, things like that, right? So the teachings are quite different. But also significantly, you see the difference between the children. One goes to the township school in the community, one goes to a school in town. The one who goes at school in town, the multiracial, in society, they are not necessarily seen as you are one. You'd see in most communities that the children who go to multiracial schools probably will play together in the same playing area, whilst the ones in the township, they will play together in the same area. So there's a disconnect between the two childhoods that come from one community, but let's say in Zwide, for instance. And now they grow, maybe one, they resent the other. Oh, you have opportunity, I don't have the opportunity. Then the one, they have been not brainwashed, but they get the mentality that we are better than the other one, right? So they grow up to be at loggerheads on issues that they do not have powers over. The one can't go to the school because they don't have the money. The other one, their parents, they want you to have better opportunities in life and better networks. So they take you to this school. And then now you find yourself at loggerheads. And I remember back then when I was still in high school, we even envied the fact that they woke up very early to take the bus to school. Right? I wake up at 7 when they're already in the bus station by in winter, right? But when we see them, like, we see privilege, we see luxury, right? Meanwhile, then when we come to play on the same ground, you don't find each other because you already have a bit of animosity that you have gotten something that I never had. So this is also what I think at some point, if we look deep into it, that what breeds crime in South Africa. There are people who have a lot of money. There are those who are struggling to make ends meet. So definitely that gap breeds a lot of things: bitterness, anger, resentment. Because I can't attain the stuff that you have, and you have more, right?
You remember well, you are aware of the idea of umcimbi,
yes.
you know, umcimbi for me is a stroke of genius from our ancestors, because it was a way for them to ensure, and it's a way for them that they recognize that there's always going to be people that have more than others. You know, they recognize that fact.
Sure.
And umcimbi is a way of ensuring that even the poorest person in the community will eat, because there are protocols that have to be followed that says ngoba uphupile. You dreamed something random because of whatever. It does not matter whether you believe in it or whatever, but kukho umcimbi enough that has to be done, you know. And xa kwenziwe lo mcimbi, you can be sure there's someone that's going to attend there that would have not eaten if it wasn't for lo mcimbi law. So you can be sure there's someone that was not going to communicate or interact with anyone if it wasn't for lo mcimbi law. And it was an opportunity for that person to feel part of something, to feel part of a family. There's a study that showed that when people eat meat together, there is a release of endorphins that comes into their mind that says, this is good.
Yes.
These people are good people. Whatever the circumstances that brought you together, stick to them.
Yes.
You know? And in a hunter-gathering world, you can imagine how if you cannot go to Woolies or Checkers to get a steak, and you have to work, you have to run, you have to prepare for days and hours on end to make sure that you get meat for the day. To be successful in that and create a fire and cook the meat and eat it, that's an evolutionary trait that says, stick to this.
Sure.
Whatever the customs, whatever the means that brought you to this point where you are eating this meat, stick to that. So we've lost that.
We have lost it. And you know, someone complained, there was something that has happened. All issues of crime, right? Crime is everywhere. Even in the villages, there's crime. And the manner in which the crime is attended to in the village, in the manner that correctional service attends to it, or the police attends to it, are quite different, right? So, I'm not speaking about heinous crimes where people kill someone. No, issues where someone has maybe housebreaking, someone took something, right? In the village, sometimes some cases will not go to the police station because one, it's far, going to court is money, so some people would not be able to do that. But where people resolve the issues, then for a man, even a woman, you are told, you are punished, you are abolished to say, you are not going to eat with the rest of us. You are going to eat alone. That's the most painful thing. And it's not, they don't say that you are not going to have food. They're saying you are not going to eat with us. You get me? And when people now, there's a umcimbi, as you are saying, the person who has been punished would go to umcimbini, but will not eat with the men in that table. The women will not eat with the other people who received. They will eat separately, and that's the most painful thing. And this is a very nice way of correcting a person, because you are not pushed to be far, but you are included, but separately. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah.
You okay?
Yeah.
Don't worry, we'll cut this out.
Okay.
Okay,
I swallowed. I always think that I'll build a house in the village, not my village, but another village. So I was saying, that signifies the humanity in African people, particularly Black people, that in as much as you have wronged us, we want to see you corrected. We want to see, and you can't correct on your own. Like, go find yourself somewhere. Yes, you are going to be given a moment, but also you need counsel for people to actually bring you back into the right path. So also we've seen now that with the chiefs, the kings, and what is Kokta, the traditional leadership. You've made reference to the Zulu kingdom. The Zulu kingdom is still very strong on their principles that this is how we do things. This is how it's going to be done. It doesn't matter who says what. Unfortunately, we saw that a case had to go to the courts. They're fighting over the throne between King Misuzulu and the other, his brother. However, even the people from there, they're like, we know who their real king is, and we're going to support the king to the last breath, because we know the importance of having the king, but also the king is a custodian of our own culture as Zulu people.
Yes.
So that becomes quite important.
There's an uncomfortability that abantu abamnyama, even abantu abamhlophe, have with seeing umuntu omnyama in a dignified position. Like they're very uncomfortable with it. They very, because it was really a stroke of genius. The Zulu monarchy gets over 100 million rand from the South African government. That is probably more than all the other leaders combined. I know the Xhosa one gets like 1 point something mil. There's two Xhosas king, right? Yeah. But that for me was when I was a kid, I didn't understand it at the time. But in later years, I appreciated the significance of that decision, and it's paid dividends to them. Our idea of self as abantu abamnyama is so fractured. Lento ithethayo ukuthi the kids that went to Eloiso looking at the kids that go to the schools in town and feeling some type of way about that is what I'm talking about when I say our education indoctrinates us into our perceived places in society. Because you are not born knowing that you are poor. You realize it at some point, Unfortunately, you realize it because of what you see happening around you. Like, okay, I've been wearing the same pants since grade 9, grade 11 now. Like, it's coming up until here. Okay, nah, I'm one of the have-nots, unfortunately.
Yes. Do you see play out with NHI? Right, I see people. There are a lot of people like, NHI, we don't have money for it. We're going to pay people. What do you call this? Refusing the NHI, saying that it's a political tactic. They are campaigning, and it's going to take a lot of money from taxes. And when you look deep into it, people are running away from privilege with their privilege. The privilege of being admitted at Mediclinic, at Life and End. And that, because that is the luxurious status that when you are in these hospitals, you want to take content in our age, you status in society changes, that she was admitted at Life. Now, if that is going to be accessible to the people who've seen it and you deem as poor, it's no longer a luxury that you have actually construed it to be. So with the NHI, the issue I've seen, it's not only the matter of money, where money is going to come from, because the other bills have been passed. There's 9 bills that have been passed. All of them, they need funding, but NHI, of course, needs more funding. But people are putting much emphasis on the NHI, and also the narrative is also driven by the healthcare institutions and practitioners who are already benefiting from the current inequalities that exist in the system, right? Because there's a lot of money that is being paid by the medical aid and schemes and the different insurances to ensure that no one actually puts their hand in the piggy bank whatsoever, because they're gaining more money. Because each person pays their premium, and you never communicate. There's never regulated properly on how much are you paying. People complain about medical aid day in, day out. But when they have to be admitted for longer, hospitalized for longer, medical aids can't pay. Then what must happen? They must go back to public hospitals. And unfortunately, some of them have lost their lives. We have seen prominent doctors, prominent celebrities, unable to pay for private healthcare. But now, when there's an introduction of NHI, people complain that they were going to pay more taxes, right? But they don't care about the many millions of people who are going to benefit from the NHI. You do not have to wait for dialysis for longer. You do not have to wait for your leg that needs amputation, because now there will be a variety of options that the government can refer you to. So with the issue of NHI, more than the tax itself, people are running with their privilege and the status in society that we are more important. That exists in healthcare, that exists in education. Historically, white institutions, they still see themselves as ivory tower of knowledge, which is their just ivory tower of whiteness, nothing much. Historical black institutions, they sometimes they become last on the food chain. in terms of getting grants and from the private donors, private grantees. They don't get much recognition. When you look into the NRF ratings, you check the university rankings, it still breeds on the white superiority complex, right? So those things, and it is important that we don't look them in isolation. We refuse the idea that NHI is a standalone arrangement government compared to the GBV builders, and these things are interlinked. And if we don't necessarily draw the dots that how this benefits the greater community, the greater South Africa, then we are going to always throw stones against government, even when it's of our own benefit.
My issue with the NHI bill is who it's coming from.
Yes, it's not.
And the timing.
Sure.
Who it's coming from and the timing for me is very suspect. The timing more than anything is very suspect for me.
Yeah.
Because this is a government that has consistently reduced public spending on hospitals and healthcare for the past 10 years. And all of a sudden now, they bring up NHI 2 weeks before the elections. I'm a big fan of NHI. I found myself in a situation where I either had to contend with losing my mother or putting her on my medical aid because the public institutions were just going to let her die. Like she was going to die. And this was 2022 or 2021. And at that point, I realized just how big the gap was. I realized how big the gap was, having spoken to people that I came up with, people that I met during the course of my life that were in medicine, either nurses or doctors, that are in the rural areas, speaking about just how the neglect that exists in the public institutions in the smaller towns where just the basics are not there. At the same time, the people that are responsible for those basics make use of private institutions for their healthcare. They do not really care about what they are responsible for. So who it's coming from and the timing concerns me. If it was post-elections, they had won, and maybe a year later they bring NHI. I'm like, okay, maybe they cooked this thing properly. But because of the timing and who it's coming from, oh my goodness.
Yeah, but remember, NHI started before 2013, right? And it's and also one issue also I have with the NHI is the fact that it didn't master the test of public participation. Many organizations, institutions, medical practitioners rejected the conception of NHI, listing their various issue problems. They actually contested in Parliament as well, went to present. However, after that, I think 25,000, what do you call these things, where people are complaining about the process of the NHI between 2013 until now. And I remember in one of the discussions, I was part of a discussion where we were scrutinizing the NHI. The fundamental idea is to actually supplement the universal health coverage to ensure that people have access to good health, and also the offering is not narrow. People have a chance to actually get assistance as soon as they can. But then it went to Parliament, right? When it went to Parliament, it also went to the National Assembly, NCOP. Not the president is the last step, right? And also, when you look into it, if the president does not return, what then happens to the work that has been done by the different structures? The National Assembly, which is governance, the NCOP, the different public participation meetings that have been held, it's expenditure, right? So for president not to finish his work, more like anyone else who is in office, there is a need for you to follow through on what needs to be done. He has signed 9 bills. The NHI is part of them. Yesterday it was the GBV and the National Prosecuting. Those ones also had to be signed because work has to be the cycle has to be closed, right? And then if people come back, they must come back, and if they want to rescind it, they rescind it. But I don't think it's going to happen. But I do think that as much as we must be suspicious of the timing, of course, is of elections, probably was planned. But also, we must not be too harsh to say the president had to do the job.
Yeah.
It's him who had to do it. Unfortunately, you get it.
But then at the end of the day, who is it coming from? Who is it coming from? Because is this the same government now that we're going to trust to actually implement this properly?
Yeah.
With all the factions and consortiums that are against it, the people that are responsible for enforcing it, do you trust them to follow through with it properly? That's the question.
Yeah. No, definitely. And we've seen with history, it's not just, we are not baffling. We've seen that there is embezzlement of funds. There is people giving tenders to their friends. There's no follow through. There's no accountability. They've taken money from the COVID-19. So these things are truths. They are facts. We've seen that this has happened. Corruption has been left unabated. That, of course, that is a very valid fear, that this might not even see the light of day because the politicians who collude with business, who provide the services, then people will not even be able to attain these services as the NHI claims. So, and those are valid affairs, and I think it's something that unfortunately we'll have to deal with it if then the election comes out the same. And
another one that is a concern for me is South Africans, as we've established, are fractured.
Sure. Yeah.
Now, imagine the issues that are going to come where people that are used to servicing a certain class of people now are going to be expected to have the same level of professionalism and care for people that they traditionally do not care for. And not just even white against black, just black that think they are above other people. Just that class thing that exists in our societies that's instilled. How is that going to happen when there hasn't been a cultural revolution in South Africa that makes us see the humanity in each other? You know? How is that going to happen? Like it's undercooked for my liking.
Yes, I hear you. No, it's going to be, remember the Patupile principle. We see it hanging in hospitals, we see it hanging in clinics. But the way people have been complaining about nurses for as long as I can think. People have said nurses are problematic in clinics. Teachers in school, they shout at the children, they tell them they're stupid. Government officers, you drag coming to the government offices, you wait for hours and hours, including officers like traffic department, you go to pay for your funds, and yet you must wait for longer. So that is a bad culture that we've had of lack of customer service. We do not, South Africans particularly, I'll say black South Africans, the issue of customer service we've taken it very lightly. You always, now there's a Home Affairs at Mainland. It's quite in and out, it's very fast. People have been saying, oh, it's quite efficient, it's so good. Why is that not the culture for all the Home Affairs in the country? Why is not the culture of many municipalities in the country? Because these people, we hope they've been trained. So it's important that they take their job seriously, right? And I think this is also a valid fear that going into let's say the implementation of the NHI, and government has made arrangements, everything is properly, and now you have to go to this institutes or institutions where you want to get services. The treatment you are going to receive, and also South Africa is a heavily bureaucratic country. We like paper. No science or DG must sign, or DDG, guys, just ensure that everybody signs at one go. Why do we have paper signing in 2024? You know, those things they must do away with those. They need to ensure that people are well trained, right? Today I had, when I went to newsroom, and the way I get received to go newsroom, like this black people, I think it's 100% black, I don't know. But they're not Stephen Cruz. They are not 100%. But the way they treat people, they don't care if you are here as a professor or not, as an analyst or not, or a commentator. They treat you the same. They take care of you. You see yourself as if you belong in there. So see, that is what we want to see for the rest of South Africa. It cannot be that when people, they want services, they drag waking up in their beds. Some would rather sleep the flu off instead of going to a clinic, because they know that the reception will not be great. Their humanity is going to be questioned. Their importance is going to be questioned. Their dignity is going to be taken away from them, because the nurse will be shouting, "Hey, Yolokazi, come here. They don't protect your dignity." And it's something that our government, we see it even in the top leadership, the way they talk to people. Our leadership lacks the basic skills of interpersonal communication and treating of human beings.
I always say that our politicians are people that came up in the bushes of Angola. They cultivated themselves in the bushes of Angola, and now all of a sudden they have to care about making sure we have walking paths, making sure that the roads don't have potholes. Like, these are not things that they were orientated towards. These are struggle people. These people did not grow up getting timeouts. That's not the culture that they come from. And the expectation for them to actually all of a sudden have value for these things is unrealistic, I think, for my part. Like, I look at having lived in the Western Cape for 5 years, and having moved to Gauteng and lived in Johannesburg for 6 months, I was shook. It was a paradigm shift, because I came from a Western Cape that, even though the townships are not clean and not attended to and all that, but for the most part, my experience driving from Cape Town to Bloem, the roads between coming from Cape Town and the moment you leave the province, everything's just, and then arriving in Johannesburg and seeing so much black wealth, I'm like, I have not seen this in the 5 years I was in the Western Cape. But then seeing the black wealth, and yet at the same time, when I lived in Rivonia, there is a house that I consistently walked by on my walks. I take daily walks, and I assumed, because of my condition, I haven't lived in the Western Cape, that house was a white family's house. It had swimming pool, basketball court, tennis court, beautiful house, corner house. And I was so shocked the day I saw the family drive out of that house. And it's a young black family, maybe the couple is in their 40s and their kids are like 12, whatever. I'm like, wow. But then how does that exist when there's a huge ass pothole just 10 steps away from this house? The people that are, we do not care about, we do not care about such things too much.
Yes, we also
because, let me finish, because at the same time, for those things to be attended to, you as the resident of that neighborhood have to be active in the politics of the ward. You have to go to the meetings. You have to show up. Myself, I will not even take it. I have never gone to such. I own an apartment in Cape Town. I have never gone to those meetings. And yet I am furious when they send me an increase on my levies and I send an email to them to ask, what is this about? And then the response is read in such a way, I'm like, they're just responding. And me reading it as a black person and reading this white woman's email, I'm like, do you know actually that I pay your bills with the money that I pay to you? Why are you responding to me like this? There's no, hi, itumeleng, good day, sir. No, this, set the context, and then, no, it's just, here's your answer. Like one line, here's your answer. I'm like, yes,
They're in the
yes.
business of making money.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, they're in the business of making money.
So we do not care about those. We do not care about going to those meetings. We do not care about the small things that really need to be done for things to be run well.
You're right. Yes, and also, but I do think that, so there are people who are like, no, I don't like politics. I don't, I'm like, oh guys, oh sorry, politics will come to you. Politics will take you from your household. Because politics is not only the party politics. It's where you buy bread. It's where you stay. It's where your kid goes for school. So politics are part of your life. So in a world where you live in a house somewhere, there's a leadership who's a ward councillor, for instance, that's a political appointee. So it's important that at least you know them. If at least that's at least you know them, be able to go vote, so that you can make your voice heard. And I've said it before that democracy is a contact sport. If you don't participate, your views are not registered. so it's important that you participate. But with the idea that maybe people do not care, and unfortunately in South Africa, we've seen that areas that mostly are not clean, squatter camps, townships, and so forth and so on. Suburbs, usually there's a clear idea of who takes the refuge on what day. There's proper system. Now, townships and informal settlements have gotten the badge of being the most dirtiest, and now the idea is that maybe the people there do not care. And I always believe that black people, we're very clean. People are very clean in their household. They know that we must clean the house. We must ensure that we don't want dirty around. People who grew up, their grandparents will tell you that Umakulu would say that in your village or so, sweep on your. So this thing is not inherent that black people are poor. Circumstances have led black people to actually have communities that are dirty because of the lack of service delivery, because there's no dustbin, simple dustbin. Thirdly, there is no proper places where people can at least burn the waste if needs be. People, they throw away waste next to their households, drainage not properly working, sewage popping up in the streets. These are not the doings of the community members. But if services were delivered to these people, the communities would be equally clean as the suburbs that we are talking about. And also, apartheid was never... So it was not only just the disenfranchised black people economically but also I think it sought to dehumanize and take the dignity of black people, pushing them into townships, ensuring that they are on top of each other, as the other person was saying, on top of each other, that in townships, there's a clear entrance of the township, there's a clear exit of the township. There's no in between. Like in where we stay, you can easily navigate the streets because there's an open end on the side and other side. But in townships, so the way the structures have been, it also had to do with people's mentalities.
Yes.
So now we are going to probably blame even now. A black person doesn't want another black person succeeding. But the system itself has been designed to penetrate the black person's mind, to hate themselves and hate the other people. And also, when they hate themselves, imagine their ability to clean, to take pride in where you stay, because already you've been pushed into a corner. So the apartheid, definitely, I think you did say that 30 years, we're a young democracy. 30 years is not sufficient to actually change everything socially, economically, and politically. At least if you are pushing economically, maybe we can translate to social changes. But I do think, fundamentally, I believe that let's start with the human first. Then as much as you have the money, but the humanity and the humility that you have as a human being must always remain, so that you don't treat your helper in a way that you would not even treat your dog. Because currently we have people who prioritize their animals more than they prioritize their helpers. Because they see money as something that I'm more powerful now, I can make rules however I want. But you need to cultivate the cultural part, the social part, and then people can just easily tap into the economic and emancipation and political emancipation.
Trevor Noah mentioned in his book Born a Crime that the thing that's not spoken of enough when it comes to apartheid and its mental conditioning of people is its effect on white people. Yeah, we talk about its effect on black people, but its effect on white people where you were told from a very early age you are better.
Yes.
Don't even try to improve yourself. You are better. You're just better. Deal with it. And then when reality strikes, when that kid is better than you at rugby, when that kid is better than you at soccer or maths or this and this, I mean, how do you contend with that?
Yes.
The part that is often emphasized with apartheid, that also something is also left out in that emphasis is black people were disenfranchised, yes. But the thing that's not spoken about enough is that in that disenfranchisement, we made a home, We made a home in something that was never meant to be a home, Like, we all have those moments where we drive past a place in South Africa and you're like, look at this, And I can guarantee you in the most filthiest, the most backwards place that you drive past in South Africa, there's a child. When that child is not there, they miss home. They miss home. We have made a home of a place that was never meant to be a home, where you see it's easier for someone getting off a taxi to throw away everything that was in their pockets as soon as they get to a kasi because but then they won't do that in Hatfield. They won't do that in Sea Point. They won't do that in places where they feel like they are visitors. When I'm at the mall, I can tell who drove there and who walked there.
Right.
I can tell because you can see the person who drove there. Maybe they didn't even shower, or they're not carrying anything, and you can see the person who's, hlohlile, the bag. That was an event. That was a moment. That was a thing that he told his friends about the day before. That this bar available, I'm going to it down. Like it's a thing because you are going to something. You're going to visit.
Sure.
You're going to visit a space where you do not feel it is home for you. Yes. Home is where your grandparents were shoved in. That's home. That you feel more comfortable in that, and it's very unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate.
Yes, and it's quite deadly, toxic, and my mom worked as a domestic worker, right?
My mom too.
Yes. Domestic workers. So my mom even now, she's very conscious of time, of how we do things, how you carry yourself in it. And then she attributes this, and we did not spend much time with her because she had to work at some point. She was sleeping in. But one thing that also that created, and also the conditioning that happened, was the fact that the domestic workers and people even now who work as domestic workers, they spend so much time with their employers that they spend less time with their kids. And also spending so much time with their employers, then they get inculcated into the culture there, and then they make it theirs. And now they have this struggle, the cognitive dissonance that they then get to experience when they have to discipline the child or maybe teach the child anything, versus with what they've been taught that for you to be professional, you are regarded when you are seen as professional when you speak English. You are seen as professional when you carry yourself in a particular way, or you are clever only when you articulate yourself better in English. If you can't articulate in English, then you are not smart enough. So those things, they get them there based on subconscious conditioning, but also they want to teach their children become parents, and they're struggling, and then they're facing that gap of cognitive dissonance. And hence now sometimes we see with the new generation, some people, they even resent their parents. Like, I saw what my parents had taught me A, B, C, and D. They never had the chance, and the situation was against them. The stakes were all against them because they spent so much time trying to make money that they missed out on how to teach their children, for them to learn how life is and unlearn some of the things that they see in society. And you become the parent. Instead, they become parent to children that they can't even breastfeed.
Wow. Yeah. I remember I was at the lower campus of UCT visiting a friend that was doing his master's there years back. It's like 4 or 5 years ago. And I was sitting on one of the benches overlooking the city of Cape Town. And the thought came to me, that view is majestic.
Yeah,
oh
beautiful.
My God, that view is majestic. And the thought that came to me, as being someone that grew up in the townships, is why wouldn't you believe you are the rightful owner of everything that you see when that is the view you are conditioned in? That is the view that you are doing your homework in, doing your notes in, as opposed to our grandparents that were at Fort Hare, barely getting by with what they had. Why wouldn't you be conditioned to think you are superior?
Sure.
This is rightfully yours. For the township, for the conditioning that is instilled in the township, the unfortunate thing about the lives of our parents and grandparents is that they got too caught up with trying to give us what they didn't have.
Yes.
They forget to give us the little they did have, which was izithethe zethu, how we do things. Apha ekhaya endlini ixesha lakho. Just be with me. Just be with me. Like, be there with me. I'm a child. I don't know I'm poor. I'm a child. I don't know that I'm black. I'm just a child. So, but then you do not have that time with your parents. You do not get that energy soaked into you. What does that translate into in the community and the problems that the community will face, where abantwana just, they're out there. You go to any township right now, you will see a 2-year-old leaning napkin. And I ask myself, where is the parents of this person? Whenever I see one of my closest friends, her sons are older now, but when the firstborn was going to mommy and me classes, and then a few years later they had their secondborn and they were going to mommy and me classes, she was always the only black woman there. She was always the only black woman there, So let's not even take it there.
Yeah.
I work out. When I go to the gym, there is swimming classes there. 50% of the gym most of the time will always be black people, but then the kids that are being taught to swim there will always mostly be white. Like, we do not have that availability to think of the significance of these small things, because they were not afforded to us. So how are we going to see the significance of affording those opportunities to our kids, The fact that you are sending your child to that school for some black parents, like that act of doing that is enough. Enye, they will do it at the school.
Yes.
But what about the me and you time? We sit down and talk about this. Put this that I'm learning in these white schools conceptually within an African context. How are you going to put it into context when you as an African have never seen Africanism as something that is worth, teaching your child?
Yeah, it's quite difficult for black parents, and because hence someone was, I'm not sure who said this, but it's all liberation. It's not parts liberation in fragmented liberation. We must be liberated in all aspects for us to be fully liberated. Because some parents will be like, I'm not able to attend my child's school meetings, swimming lessons and stuff like that because I need to go make money. And we know very well that the labor force, even in private sector, even in government now, it's quite hectic towards black women. Or black people in general, go with men, we still now, what do you call this, paternity leave is also something that is not yet inculcated into the culture of the different organizations. So with black women as well, after the 4 months of maternity leave, you have to come back to work full force. You must leave office at 5. Meanwhile, your kid has already came back from school. That means that also you stay far from where your kids goes to school. So the idea of, let's say you're fortunate driving from work to your kids' school, fetch them, therefore you must take them to work with you so that you can finish work, then you can go home. You can't do everything at once because especially you're disadvantaged. You stay far, you can't afford rent in the most places close to where your kid go to school. Secondly, at work, you are not easily excused when you say you want to attend your kids' meeting, because there's a demand that you must be at work at all times. Parenting is secondary, or it's not even secondary, it's something that you have to force if you want to do. It's never part of the integrated system of work. For you to be a great employee, you must be happy at home as well. You must be able to exert yourself and the powers that you have freely without being pressured, right? So it's quite difficult that, and it's a journey that Black parents must, maybe, I'm not sure if I say a revolution, but it's something that they must take seriously to push push their employees, push government, push the private sector to say that we want to be seen as well as people who can also parent. A father, a man, must be able to say that at 2 p.m. I'm fetching my children from school. I'll come back to work at 3. And I'll ensure that I finish my tasks for the day. Well, my KPIs are met. But I'm going to prioritize parenting, as our counterparts do. Because there's no negotiation with, I've worked with a number of white people. It's never a thing. It's like, oh, my child is attending swimming lessons at 11. I'm going. Or even sometimes my pet is not feeling well. People, they go and attend to their pets. So why is it so difficult for Black people? But also majority of the Black people are concentrated in the labor force as a working class. There's little negotiation that they can do. They work long as shifts that they can't even, when they get home, they're exhausted. They just want to make food and sleep. They can't even have conversations with their children. Hey, hear what happens at school. So now this is going to be a continuous system where Black people are constantly on the receiving end of all the injustices because of the things that they can't even control.
Ooh, we have done
right
2 hours and 30 minutes.
Yup.
And I want to end off with one of the pieces of yours that you worked on that I read, where you mentioned the concept of legacy voters. Please break that down for us.
Okay, so we wrote a paper with Karabo Mahonyana, friend of mine, on trying to understand where voters come from, right? At that time, it was quite early in the year, where we're looking into legacy voters and issue-based voters. Legacy voters include people who vote for prominent organizations like the African National Congress, people voting for the IFP, and then some will also vote for the DA. And this is based on hegemony of these parties, because these parties have been around for quite some time, that they have amassed support from various communities. Particularly like when you look into the ANC, some people vote for them based on the ANC delivered us freedom. The ANC ka Mandela, you know, our grannies. ANC ka Mandela, ANC has given us social grants, ANC has built houses for us, has built schools. They have made access for our kids to be educated. They can be wherever they want to be. So these people, they hold on to the heritage of that this ANC has done A, B, C, and D for me, and they don't want to be convinced otherwise, right? Then you look into issue-based voters. These ones are like, we have been suffering, we have not had water in Gauteng or Johannesburg for quite some time. The current party is not delivering. We want a party that is going to be able to deliver water for the city of Johannesburg. Let's hope so. And then we have other parties like we want free quality education. The EFF is promising free quality education. Therefore, probably let me vote for them. They will deliver free quality education. We want economic emancipation. We want land without expropriation. Want to nationalize money. These are issues that people really, they feel deep down that this is what I want is to see as change. And this current government has not been able to deliver that. So these are two they're not as polarized, but for the sake of that publication, we created that scenario. And also, we've seen that with young people currently, there's an indication that they are very issue-based, that we are tired of this, we load shedding. We are tired of being marginalized in institutions of higher learning. We are tired of being on the receiving end of what happens in repercussions of mining, but they never benefit from mineral resources themselves. People, they get paid peanuts in the mines. Therefore, we want to see change. So these are issues that they feel strongly about, and the parties, particularly the new parties, they claim to are going to resolve these issues, right? But also we've seen young people are more, what you call this, optimistic about the future, like things can change. And also, fortunately, they don't have the burden of history that I dodged a bullet in 1976. I still feel it. Also as humans, we are emotive. We rely our emotions, like some people in the ANC currently, hence they're holding on to power. People like, I almost mentioned names. They're holding on to power because they still like, we fought for this freedom. I was in Lusaka, therefore I deserve to be, So people, they're very emotive. So young people, they very optimistic. They want change. Even if sometimes some of them don't want change in party itself, but in leadership within the parties. We've seen people leaving ANC to go to MK. We've seen them in 2013 leaving ANC to join EFF. We have seen them in 2009 leaving ANC going to COPE, you see. So they want change regardless. So that's how we actually conceptualize the idea of the legacy voting and the issue-based voting. But going into this election, and I do not want, there is a narrative that people who vote for organizations like ANC, I'm thinking, why are you voting ANC? Right, and there was a lady who had bowed to president to say that, thank you for everything. And some people are commenting there, what is everything? Are you mad? And things like that. And also, we should all shy away from infantilizing these people and also thinking that they're unthinking, that they are delusional, that they are trying to appease the ANC leadership. These people, I believe that they are people who are able to think for themselves and take decisions for themselves. And these are the people that they are not also saying untruths or that they have providing false information. These people have seen the work of the party, and whether the work you resonated with it or not, it's not part of the conversation. The fact that for someone they're getting 350 and they attribute that to the work of the ANC, it's something important. Therefore, the 350 have made huge differences for these people. People now are able to have conversation about food prices because they can also go and buy food. That's a very important power. People can contribute in their families. People can contribute to their fathers can contribute for their children. That is important. So for a person to use that and say, I can vote for the ANC because they gave me 350, or the party has given me, my grandmother, social grants, therefore I feel like I'm indebted to that party. Those things are valid. And also, I always believe that many things can be true at once. There's no one single truth, depending on when you look at it. And we must never write history based on a single story, that the ANC has failed. Therefore, no, for some people, the ANC has done a bit for them, and they want to give it more chance for them to do even more. Some are saying that the EFF, we have seen strides in the various communities, in the various municipalities. Therefore, it gives us an indication that they can do the best. That could be true as well. So let us be open to multiple truths, but maybe definitely you lean towards what you believe in. Because yes, there are facts, and then there's truths. And truths are more reflective of the person, the face, the human face. And then this is going to determine what happens in the next election.
Whew. Thank you for the breakdown. Thank you for the time. Thank you for being on the podcast. It's been a very enlightening conversation. And it's very hard to end. Like, I feel like I could go on for a while, but you are tired. This is your second engagement today.
This is my second engagement. I had 3 hours in our
So where can people find you?
On social media, I have LinkedIn. Start with the LinkedIn, Yolokazi Mfuto. And then I have Facebook, and then I have Twitter and Instagram. But preferably, Facebook is where you find me the most.
Okay.
And then Twitter, I retweet a lot of stuff.
What's your username on Twitter?
Yolo_Mfuto.
Okay.
Yes, my name is Yolo. So you only live once. Make it count. Make your vote count. Elections.
Let's end it there.
Yes, all right.